the breeding program, we had our first stretch of releases with some of the initial germplasm that we started working with. Some of these newer experimentals, the KSR lines here, are kind of getting into kind of the next phase of germplasm that we worked with. So some new parent lines we've brought in, and to make some crosses, generate new varieties that bring some unique traits to the game. In the next phase, kind of phase 3, we've got even more, I think, interesting germplasm that we're working with. Some of the breeding lines that we've had that have really shown some high levels of winter survival, we've back-crossed Roundup resistance into those, and hopefully within the next 3 to 4 years, we'll have some of those lines kind of make their way into the program. We've also crossed to some lines that have better blackleg tolerance, which Dr. Damacone said is an important trait for Oklahoma and Southern Plains. The thing that I'm really most interested in will kind of be the 4th generation of Roundup resistance for the Southern Great Plains, and that is bringing the TrueFlex trait to winter canola hybrids here. So we've had some winter canola hybrids that were Roundup Ready here in the past that have been pretty good. In the tougher winters, they've struggled somewhat. So we really need to bring Roundup Ready hybrids to the market that have exceptional winter hardiness. And we hope to do that with the TrueFlex trait. We're developing the parent lines that will possess the TrueFlex trait. We're mostly working kind of on the female side of things. And with that TrueFlex trait, we're also bringing pod shatter tolerance. We're bringing the semi-dwarfing trait, which is a trait that has benefits on the winter hardiness side of thing, but also on the spring, like stalk stiffness and reduced height type of traits. So I think that can have a really good benefit down here in the Southern Plains. Some of the benefits of the TrueFlex trait are actually basically improved crop safety, longer application window, so you can apply Roundup into flowering now with the TrueFlex trait. So if you have kind of a spotty stand and you have weed issues and you can't get out there until the crop is flowering, you can actually go out there and apply Roundup at flowering. There's also higher usage rates now for the harder to control weeds. So I think it's going to bring some real benefits to the Southern Great Plains market. And we anticipate within the next 5 to 10 years, we'll probably start to see maybe some TrueFlex hybrids come onto the market. For sure, hopefully in the next 5 years, we'll at least have some experimental hybrids that we're working with. So I'm pretty excited about the prospects of this new trait. It'll be available for the first time in spring canola hybrids in Canada this year, and their Bayer Crop Science is extremely excited about some of the new traits that are coming along with TrueFlex. So I'm pretty excited about where that trait is going to hopefully lead us in the future with Roundup resistance. So just starting with the Roundup varieties behind me, we'll talk about that. And you guys are more than likely familiar with High Class 115, now Cropland 115. They kind of changed their brand naming scheme. But it's been around a long time, kind of an early, fairly stress-tolerant variety that's been good for a lot of years. It's kind of our standard check now for Roundup Ready. That's still available. Then the 225 to the end, those are all out of our breeding program. And High Class 225 has been on the market now. I think this was its 3rd year that it was available. I like 225. It's probably not as winter hardy as 115. It's just a tail a little bit later, so it kind of comes in on the tail end of 115. High oil content and exceptional yield in these years where we don't have the really cold winters and we have the nice mild spring conditions. It really has a very high top end yield. So I'll be anxious to see what 225 does this year. The 320 was available for the first time here in Oklahoma and Kansas. Really excited about 320. It's about as early as 115 is in terms of maturity. It's not a cert variety, it's just a straight Roundup Ready. Last year in the Oklahoma performance trials, it was the top Roundup Ready variety, and it was top in all 4 locations that Josh harvested last year. So it's not a real flashy variety. It tends to hide the yield, so if you go out and kind of walk along the field and look at it, it may not look very good, but it's one of those varieties where it just yields at the end. Have very nice long pods on it. Pretty good oil content, maybe not to the level of what 225 is, but still pretty good. And then the other trait about 320 is it's the most winter hardy commercial Roundup Ready variety at this point in time. So I think it brings a lot of things to the table for the Southern Great Plains, and I think I'd encourage you to take a serious look about it next fall if you're thinking about planting canola. See how it does this year in the variety trials. The 4723 is one that we've approved for increase this year through K-State, hoping to bring it forward for release this year. 4723 of the Roundup Readies here has the highest oil content. I think across 3 locations that Josh had oil contents for last year, it was above 40% in those trials. In Kansas, it looks really good. It's been the top Roundup Ready variety, or it has the top 3-year average across our Roundup Ready trials in Kansas. It's actually a sister line to 320. It comes from the same cross. It's just a different plant selection, but it's just a hair later and just a little bit taller than what the 320 will be. But I'm anxious to see how 4723 does this year. If the yield trial looks good, we'll probably bring it forward for release. And then the 4765 and the 4767 are 2 experimentals, both just Roundup Ready. The 4767 is a cross to a variety that we released called Griffin. Griffin is it kind of acts like one of those the semi-dwarf varieties does, in that it's got a very prostrate, flat growth habit and has excellent winter hardiness. That prostrate growth habit really tends to help with overwintering. And so the 4767 brings that trait along with it as a cross to Griffin. It appears to be a little bit earlier than what the 4765 is. 4765 is a cross to a winter canola line out of our program that has a very long vernalization period, and sometimes you see some correlations between vernalization and winter hardiness. It's not a perfect correlation, but it's a trait that we sometimes talk about. Those varieties that have that longer vernalization period aren't necessarily the fastest to come out of dormancy in the spring, and so sometimes you can pick up, I guess, some winter hardiness on the back end of things. If you would have some late freezes, it's a little bit slower to bolt. And so it has been a pretty good variety in our experimental trials as well. This is the first time that we're testing it in Oklahoma, so we'll see how it does as well. Well, on the conventional side of things, a few things in here that I know, some other things that I really don't know anything about, so your guess is kind of as good as mine as what they're going to show. But you should be familiar with the Mercedes and Inspiration from Rubisco Seeds. I really like the Mercedes hybrid. I have for a number of years now. It's been an exceptional yielder, very high oil content as well. One that I'd certainly consider planting if I was looking at a conventional hybrid. Inspiration is also a very good hybrid, not as winter hardy as what Mercedes is, but the one trait that Inspiration does bring to the table is it's the most pod shatter tolerant hybrid that's commercially available at this time. It doesn't necessarily have a pod shatter gene, but it's been selected for pod shatter tolerance. And it's if you're here and the pods were mature, they're very pliable. They bend. It's got very good pod integrity. So if that's a trait that you're very concerned about and can plant it in a conventional, then I would certainly think about Inspiration. The MH16 experimentals here, they're from Photosyntec, is that correct? Okay, so Photosyntec has licensed varieties such as the Chrome variety, which has been around for some time. Yeah, Heccup, however you pronounce that, it's been around a while. And there's another one, it'll come to me. But those hybrids come from a breeding program in France, KWS Momont. They're on the lighter side of winter hardiness, so if we have one of these really challenging cold winters, you got to keep that in mind if you're growing something from these breeding programs. But in these years where the winters are more mild and we have good moisture, these things are really going to flex and show some very good yield. They also produce very nice high oil contents as well. And I'm not familiar with these experimental names. They're different than what I have. I imagine they're also probably in the national trial, but couldn't tell you for sure. So I guess the jury's kind of out on those two. We'll see how they do. So Riley is out of our program, a conventional that we released back in 2010. Excellent winter hardiness. Riley is kind of the new Wichita for the Southern Plains. Just a conventional OP check, but it's extremely consistent and has been a good variety for us. Really good blackleg tolerance on Riley, I think, in the field. Surefire is our replacement for Sumner. So if you grew canola back in the 2003, 2004, Sumner first came out. SU carryover tolerant variety. Surefire is its replacement. Surefire has some differences though. It's taller and it's much later than what Sumner was. Surefire is actually a cross between Sumner and a line that we got from the University of Idaho breeding program that also has SU carryover tolerance. So Surefire's tolerance to SUs is just as high as what Sumner's is. Surefire, I really like its yield potential. It will certainly yield like a hybrid in the winters where we're more mild and have more rainfall. You throw the fertility to it, it's going to yield. It's very, very good on yield, pretty decent on oil content, but probably also has the best blackleg tolerance out of our breeding program currently. So something to certainly keep your eye on. We've licensed Surefire to a company out of the Pacific Northwest called Spectrum Crop Development, and they've been around in the canola industry for 30 years approximately. But they certainly have interest in sending seed down here to Oklahoma and Kansas if there are growers that are interested in it. They've got an increase of it this year, so there should be seed available of that. It's just not real local, but certainly I think Surefire could be a yielder down here in Oklahoma and Kansas. The Advocate and Architect come from Lima grain. Again, I don't know much about the Lima grain genetics. They are hybrids that come from Europe. I've got these hybrids in the national variety trial as well this year, so we'll see kind of what characteristics they bring to the table. But the Lima grain stuff seems to yield pretty well down here in Oklahoma, especially again when your winters are more mild. They're going to be a little bit more weak on winter hardiness since they are being brought over from Europe, but something to certainly keep your eye on with the Lima grain materials.